Hey folks, Alex McMahon here of Evolve Nutritional Therapy. Today we're going to be continuing on and actually wrapping up our series on why fat loss is more difficult for women. In the previous 6 videos, we've been discussing the biological reasons as to why fat loss is more difficult for women than it is for men. Today, however, we're going to be discussing the solutions to these problems and the things you can start incorporating today to start achieving the fat loss that you desire. So the very first thing that you can start by doing is cycling your calories. So the fact remains that you're going to have to create a caloric deficit whenever it comes to achieving fat loss. When you try to do too much exercise while eating too little, it creates a much more stressful environment for the body that can interfere with hormones, the menstrual cycle, energy levels, and it can just create a much bigger problem and make it a lot more difficult process. So to help with this, you'll do calorie cycling. Essentially, you'll eat a little bit more on the days where you're working hard in the gym, where you're lifting weights and doing cardio. And then on the days where you're resting or just doing cardio, you'll eat a little bit less to create the caloric deficit for fat loss to happen. The second part is to start off with slower dieting and less cardio. So if you cut calories by too much too soon, it makes it much more difficult for you to stick to your diet and your nutrition plan, and it also leaves far less room for adjustments to be made when you do experience a fat loss plateau. Now let's take, for example, if you start by trying to eat 1,100 calories and doing an hour of cardio every single day. Well, in the very beginning, you may start off making some quick progress. In the long run, it'll make it much more difficult for you to stick to that program. And then when you do experience a plateau, you're going to have to resort to much more extreme measures that your body will push back on much harder, making fat loss more difficult for you to achieve. So if you accept a slower rate of fat loss by taking a slower amount of time that you're dieting and starting off doing less cardio, then you can actually achieve better progress in the long term. The next thing would be to incorporate diet breaks and refeeds. Essentially, after you've been dieting for a long period of time, typically 8 to 12 weeks, you can prevent some of the negative adaptations to your caloric burn and to drops in leptin by incorporating both diet breaks and refeeds. So a full diet break is where you increase the amount of food that you eat for 1 to 2 week period to help prevent some of the adaptations. So what will happen is in a full diet break, you'll bring your calories back up to a maintenance level for 1 to 2 weeks, and you'll stay there until you're ready to go back down and create another caloric deficit to start dieting again. This allows your body to return your metabolic rate back up to where it would normally be, and it allows you to fully restore muscle glycogen and to bring leptin levels back up to the pre-diet. Refeeds are the other approach where once a week or every 3 to 4 days, you'll incorporate a day where you eat 300 to 400 calories more, predominantly coming from carbohydrates. Now, a refeed is great because it allows you to do a lot of the same things as a full-on diet break. It allows you to bring glycogen levels back up. It allows you to restore some of the leptin levels by increasing carbohydrates, and it also allows you to prevent some of the metabolic slowdown that happens that will make further fat loss more difficult in the future. Now, another thing to start talking about is strength training. Along with adequate protein intake and a good, smart strength training program, it will allow you to preserve and in some cases even build lean muscle mass during the process of dieting. By building or preserving lean muscle mass, it will allow you to actually create a greater caloric burn. As we've discussed in previous videos, the more muscle mass you can have, the more calories your body is actually going to expend to preserve and to maintain that muscle mass, because muscle is a much more metabolically active tissue. Now, on top of that, strength training will increase your insulin sensitivity. That means that your body will actually be much more efficient at using the carbohydrates that you're consuming, and there'll be much less of a chance of those carbs turning into fat. On top of that, strength training, well, however small it is, does also increase your caloric burn. So you'll burn more calories while you're at the gym training or while you're doing any kind of cardiovascular exercise as well. The next thing to think about is a deload. So after 8 to 12 weeks of tough strength training in the gym, incorporating a deload is a complete break from any kind of formalized strength training that allows the body to fully recover so you can jump back into your next training cycle being fully restored and ready to work really hard without having any problems. The next 2 things to discuss are what I don't think enough people are talking enough about, and that's stress and sleep management. The very first thing to talk about when it comes to stress is whether it be a physical stress, a psychological stress, or a stress from something like dieting. Your body only recognizes stress. Now, this is another reason why trying to cut too many calories and throwing too much exercise at your body at one time is going to be a bad idea. That's going to overburden your body with more stress than it has the capacity to recover from. And when your body gets in this really overly stressed state, there's going to be hormonal dysfunction. It could interfere with your menstrual cycle. It can create insomnia. It can make sticking to your diet much more difficult. And then on top of that, your energy will be zapped and your performance in the gym will go down dramatically. Now, on top of that, what can happen is when you're in an overly stressed state, there'll be an overproduction of the stress hormone cortisol. Now, when you have too much cortisol, one of the big things that's going to happen is you're actually going to retain a lot more water weight than you normally would. Now, what this does is it makes it so that you may think that you're not losing any fat because the scale isn't going down. However, because you're in a highly stressed state, your body's actually retaining enough water that it's actually masking your fat loss. So to help combat this, I recommend that you try to engage in some kind of daily stress management. This could be something such as going to yoga class, reading a book that you enjoy, listening to a podcast or music that you like, meditating, or going for a walk. Essentially just taking 20 to 30 minutes every single day that you do something that allows you to get away from all the rest of life's stresses and just focus on something that you enjoy and really like doing. Now, the next part of this equation is to talk about sleep. Now, I'm not sure that I've seen any bigger return on investment when it comes to getting healthy and losing fat with my clients than I have seen when I can get them to actually get in adequate sleep. Now, that would be roughly 7 to 9 hours in a pitch black room. Insufficient sleep actually causes you to be more insulin resistant, which means that if you do have an excess of calories coming in, they'll be more likely to be stored as body fat. Now, specifically, if those calories are coming from carbohydrates and sugars, your body will be much more likely to store them as body fat than it would be if you were in a more sleep-restored state. On top of that, being sleep deprived makes it much more difficult to stick to your nutrition plan. People become much more impulsive around food, and people actually have a tendency when they do indulge after they've been deprived of sleep to indulge on very calorically dense and very hyper-palatable foods that are very easy to overeat. Now, why this is such a big thing to keep in mind is because if you do indulge and you go off your nutrition plan and you overeat in a sleep-deprived state, that also means that being more insulin resistant, more of those calories will have a likelihood of being diverted to fat storage than they would be to be burned off as energy or to restore muscle glycogen in a more sleep-restored state. Now, the last thing to talk about is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And we touched on this in one of our previous videos, however, it's a big important factor to keep in mind. One of the biggest things is when women experience a drop in their metabolism from dieting, one of the biggest areas that they see this happen is this non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Now, NEAT is actually your day-to-day activities that take place from the moment you wake up to the moment that you go to sleep that aren't formal exercise. So this could be walking to the grocery store, it could be fidgeting, it could be working at a standing desk, doing yard work, cooking, doing the dishes, anything like that all encompasses NEAT. And when people go on a strict diet for a long period of time, they see a reduction in this NEAT activity. However, women see a much larger reduction in the amount of calories that they burn from NEAT when they're in a caloric deficit. So one of the things that you can do to help with this is to get some form of an activity tracker. I don't believe that activity trackers are really accurate when it comes to the amount of calories that they tell you that they burn. However, one of the things is it does track your overall activity for the day. So you can set a goal for yourself like 8,000 or 10,000 steps, and by having one of those activity trackers like a Fitbit or something like that, it allows you to measure whether you're hitting that on a day-to-day basis. And if you're dieting, it allows you to see if you're having any big drops in your daily movement and to try to compensate for that by walking a little bit more or something like that. Now, these are the day-to-day action steps that you can take to help combat some of the problems that we've discussed in the previous 6 videos. However, there's a whole host of other strategies that you can use that pertain directly to the menstrual cycle and the different phases of the menstrual cycle that we spoke about in videos 5 and 6. I'd be more than happy to make them, but I want to know that there's enough people out there that would like to see them before I invest the time to make them. So please go ahead and contact me through social media or email me, and you can find those links below. Hey folks, I'd like to offer you a free limited time 30-minute phone strategy session with me. We'll discuss what your current health, fitness, and fat loss goals are, the roadblocks that are preventing you from getting the results you desire, how as a coach I can help support you and keep you accountable, and then the simple and sustainable steps and habits you can start incorporating today to achieve the results you desire and to be able to actually keep them. Go ahead and click on the link below in the description, and I look forward to chatting with you on the phone.